Supernatural Tales.
As he walked over the pebbles down to the sea, the sun was a riot of orange and red. Although it was late in the evening, seals still basked on the rocks beneath the cliff, unfazed by the clattering of his boots. The vast greyness of the Atlantic broiled in front of him. He could picture America 3,000 miles away, where she had gone, and from where she would soon come back to him. He had found Argyll, this most beautiful of wild places. Arriving at Andrew's Croft in a taxi from the station, he'd been appalled by its isolation. The one-roomed hovel hugging the wind-smoothed contours of the hollow, the rain icy and relentless. But he settled in, and when the storm passed and the sun re-emerged, he discovered the bay. He'd spent whole days here with a succession of books, observing the tides, the zigzag of the currents, the billowing, scudding clouds against the blue. The light had that eerie precision found only this far north, and in the evenings the sky caught fire. Before the dark engulfed the day, he retreated to the croft and lit the stove. This was the time he dreaded most, when his unease resurfaced and the bay seemed again a foreign land. In the shadows of the lamplight she sought him. As he cleared up after dinner, he could smell her skin, fool himself that he heard the music of her voice. When the longing became too much, he took a sleeping pill, laid himself on the narrow bed, and fell into empty sleep. The next day, still groggy, he hired the taxi to take him to Dunoon, where he shopped for groceries, supplies, and oil for the lamp. It had become his habit to take his lunch in a cafe near the harbour. As he sat eating his meal at the table in the window, the waitress asked him where he was staying. She raised her eyebrows at his answer. "The Croft at the bay. You must be harder than you look." There was little else to do in the town. He walked about the streets, took photographs of the handsome buildings. On the ride back, the taxi driver eyed him in the rear-view mirror. "You getting on all right?" "Yes, thank you." "It's not a bit quiet for you, out there at the bay?" "No, it's fine." "I could recommend a good bed and breakfast." "No, thank you. I'm researching a book." "Come up from London, have you?" "Yes." "What will the book be about?" It's about Scottish myths and legends, to do with the sea and things." "Oh, aye. You should talk to Muir up at Craig Lochie. He's your man." The more he thought about it, the better the book idea seemed. For the first time in a long while he felt the stirrings of interest in something other than her. Perhaps he could persuade his agent to sound out some publishers, those that had yet to give up on him. He resolved to call her once he'd worked up the idea. It would give him something to do. He found his notepad and headed to the bay. Once more the seals were laid out on the rocks. Every so often one of them rolled over, raised a flipper, nosed its neighbour. Their smooth, sleek indolence was almost indecent. He had never seen them feed or fight or mate. It was as if they were in a state of readiness for some arrival or event. He sat down on the pebbles, leaning his notebook on his knees so that he could write. It came to him that he might create a hybrid, a mix of myth and fiction, a more poetic and creative approach than other authors would have taken. With any luck, he would be able to borrow some books from the library in Dunoon. When he'd read up on the subject, he would visit this Muir and pick his brains. He rang the taxi firm and rebooked the cab for the morning. For once he'd managed to fall asleep without taking a pill. Sometime in the early hours a thin keening woke him. By the time he'd lit the oil lamp the noise had ceased. For the rest of the night he drifted in and out of sleep, half listening for it to begin again. At first light he got up and searched outside, but there was nothing to see. It must be the seals, he thought, roused at last from their long lethargy. Myths and Legends of the Western Isles was by far the most useful book he could find in the library. Although it had been published as long ago as 1976, it was liberally illustrated and written in a lively, engaging style. He learned from the librarian that, as a visitor, he was not permitted to borrow the books, but for a small fee he could photocopy selected pages on their machine. He took out his notepad and began to jot down some of the more useful passages. Much of it he'd heard before, stories of the giant Finn McCool, of Kelpies and Selkies and the blue men of the Minch, half remembered from past reading, and an Irish girlfriend from his student days who'd researched her Celtic heritage and wrote impenetrable poetry about it. Some tales were new to him, like that of the Ben Nia, Gaelic for washerwoman, who could be found, it was said, by streams and pools, washing the clothes of those about to die. He noted it all down, but ideas for his own creative input failed to materialize. The unearthly wailing woke him again. He lit the lamp and went outside. At once the keening stopped, the shadowy rocks mute and unmoving. From the bay he could hear the slow rhythm of the surf. Back in the Croft he fell on the bed, giving himself up to the long agony of needing her. He worked on in the library, reading through the books, expanding his notes into paragraphs and chapters. He was beginning to see how the book could work, how his own poetry might complement and enhance the explanations and the illustrations that would have to be commissioned. It was a long time since he'd written poetry. The skies cleared, and he walked to the bay. The sea was smooth, and there was a new chill in the air. Soon it would be autumn. Tall clouds banked on the horizon. He saw, with a pang, that the seals had gone. The noise ceased, or no longer disturbed him, and his dreams were filled with her. She lay on his sofa in a sealskin coat, his slow unbuttoning revealing her oiled skin beneath. She ate alone in a restaurant while he banged on the glass, unable to find a way in. He made love to her on a sailing boat, her head turned away, her eyes fixed on the restless sea. He woke, his skin taut and dry, ready to transform into whatever she might want him to be. The arrangements were made, and the taxi driver drove him to Craig. His agent, after some initial surprise, had been encouraging about the book. His was still a name people recognized, and she promised to send out feelers to 1 or 2 commissioning editors. Craig Lochie was halfway up the mountain, a pebble-dashed Victorian hunting lodge. The taxi driver insisted that he would wait on the forecourt. "Might as well," he said, spitting onto the gravel. "I've nothing else until 6. The bell pull seemed not to work. After a minute or 2 he thumped on the door. It was opened by a small man, ancient but well preserved, in a tie and tweed suit. "I'm Muir," he said. "Just Muir. It's easier." They walked along a dim, broad hall furnished with dark oils and sporting prints. With the brief flick of a finger, Muir indicated a room which seemed to be a study and library combined. There were books everywhere, crammed onto shelves, piled on the desk, stacked on the floor. The furniture was mahogany and heavy. On the edge of the desk squatted a laptop computer. "You're interested in our quaint Scottish legends." Muir's accent was English public school, his voice high-pitched. "And you're writing a book about them." Muir seated himself in a deep armchair. "I hope to. It's still at the research stage." Without being asked, he sat down. Muir followed his movements with hooded eyes. "Research, yes," said Muir. "May I ask, what qualifies you to write a book like that?" "I've written quite a few things. They've sold well." "And what do you want from me, do you think?" I thought—" "Oh dear, perhaps you could have prepared a little better before you came to see me." "I'm sorry. I would really appreciate your help and advice. I'll make sure there's a formal acknowledgement." Muir drummed his fingers on the polished wood of the desk. Well, let's see where we get to." Muir flicked a finger at the dictaphone. "You can switch on that device of yours." Muir spoke for over an hour, assured, practised, précising the myths and legends of Western Scotland, replicating much of his own research. Lethargy crept over him, the dull tick of the study clock measuring out each second. Muir continued, "You'll have heard, of course, about the Selkie, the seal that can shed its skin and become human, then reclothe itself in its sealskin and return to its own kind. Well, there is an altogether more troubling tale about a young man who found a beautiful female Selkie sunbathing on a beach with the seals. He stole her skin and forced her to become his wife, but one day she found the skin where he'd hidden it, resumed her seal form, and escaped back to the sea." Muir closed his eyes. "Thank you," he said, switching off the voice recorder. "That was really useful." Muir laughed dryly, his eyes wide open now. "You're not interested in our silly old stories, are you? Not for their own sake, for what they keep alive. I imagine you've long ago left behind the morality of your own kind. You're a young man on the make, hungry to, well, remake his name. And names are important, aren't they? Tell me, Englishman, are you comfortable in your own skin?" "What do you mean?" Muir bared his small yellow teeth. "I've done my research. Despite my great age, I have learned how to use a computer. You see, I know who you are. I read about you and your girlfriend in the newspapers, how your behaviour, flaunting yourselves, drove her poor husband to—" Aghast, he gulped. "It wasn't sordid. I love her. And your infatuation overrides all else. Her loyalty, the life she had made, the creature she really is. I rescued her. She was sleepwalking. She loves me. And where is she now, this love of yours? Off in New York, I hear. A new job, a man in tow. Older, it seems, like her husband. Back with her own kind." He put his hands over his ears. "Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!" With both hands he grasped a heavy book from the desk and raised it above his head. Muir stayed very still in his armchair. The taxi driver knew better than to talk on the return journey. It was a shame the Englishman would be leaving. He was a good customer. As the taxi neared the bay, it passed a woman washing clothes in the burn. Her body rocked backwards and forwards as she scrubbed and rinsed and wrung, the rhythm of her work repeating itself over and over in a ritual as old as time.
So, Staley, il y a-t-il